Hello, friends and listeners. Welcome to Truth, Lies, and Alibis, the true crime podcast from three friends sharing their perspectives from having years of 911 dispatching experience.
Episode 30.
1 and 3.
In this episode, Brittany and Jess bring attention to the often forgotten and passed over truth that men are also victims of domestic violence. We specifically look at the murder of Daniel Green and the plotted murder of Isaiah Carvalho.
So I'm going to continue with our domestic violence awareness stories, and I've got two stories to share with you tonight. I wanted to ask, I think we kind of a little bit talked about it in our last episode about domestic violence against men, but have you ever taken a call from a male subject being the victim?
I took third-party report, so I don't think that's probably not true. I've taken I don't know how many calls over my career as a dispatcher. So I barely remember the big ones nowadays. So, unless something like memorable happens, it doesn't stay in my brain.
Got rid of it to make room for more.
Yeah, right. But I was going to say I don't really remember, but I had to have. Like, whether it was a typical domestic violence call or not, or it was just, my girlfriend's pushing me around. Mm-hmm. Like, a lot of times I feel like from my experience, I won't say this that covers, across the board, but I feel like in the event that the male is a victim of a domestic violence, a lot of times when the male calls in, it's not... I haven't taken one where they were seriously injured.
Yeah.
I haven't taken a call where, they've locked themselves in a room or something like that. A lot of times, they're still yelling and arguing, and it's kind of like he's calling, she's listening and yelling in the background. It's that kind of scenario, which happens on both sides. Females definitely call in that same sort of scenario. Yeah. I've definitely taken those calls as well. But the majority of calls that I've taken for men that are the victim of domestic violence, it's that kind of situation. But I do remember one that kind of was more serious in the aspect of that it was physical, but it was a late reported third party. Okay. So a friend had heard that this had happened and was calling on behalf of that victim. And I think that, and again, we won't spend too much time on it because I did talk about it last episode, but I think those numbers are higher. Men that are victims of domestic violence, I think, have that beaten into them that they shouldn't report it, and if they do, they're weaker. Yeah. So
it's
a
not
lot of
the
that
manly thing
goes
to do.
Unreported.
Yeah.
Yeah. So of course, over my career, those are a lower volume. I don't have as many of those because they don't want to be labeled as the quote-unquote victim, because that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
Apparently.
I can think of two. Like you said, I'm sure there's more, but I just can't think of them because of the amount of calls we get, right?
Yeah.
One was the next day, like you said, and they had been fighting for the whole time. And it had been physical the night before, but now he just wanted her to leave, and they were separated, and he was at the apartment, but she was in her car and wouldn't leave. And then there was one where I could, like you said, I could hear the female in the background, yelling at him, and he literally just wanted her to leave. And it had just been a verbal altercation, as far as he had said. And then she, left, and then he was worried about her because she threatened to commit suicide, which, as we talked about before, is a way to control your partner. So... Yep. Those are the only ones that I can really think of that stand out. But like you said, it's never been, so far, I've never taken a call where a female was actively beating up her male partner. Mm-hmm. I just haven't. And I know that's probably, like you said, because one, it's unreported. So the call I took that was the next day, who knows what would have happened if he had called that night, right?
Right.
And I think they just don't want to make that report because they don't want their male friends or anyone to view them as weaker than they want to be perceived.
And I think there's also a bit of, I don't know if I'd call it a fear, but a bit of apprehension because I'll use the term norm loosely. because it happens. It just, we don't hear about it. The people, like when police show up to domestic violence, your mind jumps to the female being the victim. Mm-hmm. So and now that we kind of talk about it more, I can remember calls in which they were worried, like the male, the victim I was talking to, was worried that when the police got there, they were just going to believe everything that she had to say because she's the woman in the situation. Mm-hmm. And because that's a much higher statistic of women being victims of domestic violence, that it's like, well, I don't want the police to show up here because I'm going to end up going to jail.
Yeah.
I think there's some of that too, where it's the apprehension of, like, are the police even going to believe that I'm the victim here?
Yeah.
Because I am male, you know.
Which is sad.
Yeah.
I'm going to kind of, because I already went over this in detail last episode, but I'm kind of just going to review that about 1 in 3 men experience contact sexual violence, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner in their lifetime. And this is per the CDC. And nearly 56% of men who are victims have experienced these or other forms of violence by that partner before the age of 25. And these, like we said, are just the reported. So, today I'm going to tell you 2 stories where there was a male subject who was the victim of domestic violence and kind of their outcomes. So, it just so happens that the first story is about an officer by the name of Officer Daniel Green, and he was the victim, which when you think of an officer, you don't typically think of them being the victims of domestic violence. And I thought this story was good because it shows that, like we said before, it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter how much money you make. It doesn't matter where you're from. You can be a victim of domestic violence. My sources today are 48 Hours, the Sun Gazette, Dateline, and Cinemaholic, as well as the New York Post. The stuff I have in this story came from those different sources, but a lot of it came from a 48 Hours on it. On February 6th, 2015, Daniel Green was found murdered. The district attorney, Tim Ward, would say he was executed. That was a quote, like it was an execution. And when he didn't report to work that day, one of his coworkers went to check on Daniel in his home, and he was found shot to death in the bathroom. None of the neighbors had heard or seen anything, so it was super suspicious because they hadn't heard any gunshots. They hadn't seen anybody suspicious. But at the time, Daniel was divorced and living alone. He had been involved in a toxic marriage, but things had been over for a while. So in the 48 Hours episode, his twin brother and his sister are interviewed, and they had said that right before this, like a month before or so, they had gone to a birthday party for Daniel's son, and that Daniel's ex-wife or estranged wife had been there, and they seemed to be getting along, and it didn't seem like anything bad was going on between the couple. And the sister even said, like, I thought they were getting back together because they had a history of getting together and breaking up.
On again, off again.
Yeah. Daniel's identical brother, Matt, and his sister, Misty, told 48 Hours that they were a team, and this is a quote, "It was the 3 of us against the world kind of thing." Matt and Daniel were both police officers. Matt would eventually go on to be a lawyer, but Daniel would settle into his job, and from what they said, he loved it. He decided he wanted to be a cop when he was around 14, and it sounds like he really enjoyed what he was doing. He was also part of a motorcycle club called Team Flatline, which I thought was kind of an odd name, but okay. And from all accounts, like, he really enjoyed riding his motorcycle with the club and just kind of being involved in it. Mm-hmm. Misty and Matt would tell 48 Hours that Daniel dated a lot before he met his ex-wife, Erica Sandoval, in 2009, but he fell in love with her quickly, and they decided to settle down. And they were both infatuated with each other, so she also fell in love with him very quickly. Married less than a year after meeting, when Daniel was 26 and Erica was 23. I guess they went to Vegas and got married, and then they sent text messages to their family and friends, which is fine.
I mean, if I was going to do it.
But they were like, they sent like a picture of their marriage license. So people were surprised that they got married because they hadn't been together that long. They were like, okay. And then weeks later, Erica's family would throw them a huge reception. So she was in a really pretty white dress. They had this huge party to celebrate. Daniel's friends and family weren't as excited about the marriage, and they said there had been times where he had talked about Erica being emotionally and physically abusive, and Erica had even taken a knife to some of Daniel's furniture. or she took a knife to his bed and his couch.
Okay, sure.
Which I feel like would be a red flag. I'm just saying. According to 48 Hours, the Green children had grown up with a physically and emotionally abusive stepfather, which led them to growing so close. And that's why it was kind of them against the world thing. So he had grown up in a home where domestic violence was
a regular thing.
Normal, quote unquote normal, you know. And when kids see domestic violence, they either go on to believe that's acceptable treatment against them, and that's kind of what love is, or they go on to abuse their partners a lot of times. It doesn't happen every time, but a lot of times it does. So at one point, their mother had even taken an order of protection out against their stepfather, and Misty and Matt said they could both see signs of domestic violence in the relationship between Erica and Daniel. Apparently, a neighbor had even had to call police about an incident where Erica was cursing at Daniel loudly and trying to get Daniel to hit her. Both of them were arrested, but there were no charges filed against either of them, and this was only a little more than a year after they got married. They filed for divorce, but Erica would tell friends and family soon after that she was pregnant with Daniel's baby. So he would tell his friends that she was abusive, but she would in return say that he was abusive. So, like, I know that he was obviously a victim of domestic violence, right? She was physically, emotionally abusive. She took knives to his furniture, but I don't know if he was also abusive back. But it could have been one of those situations where they both kind of fed off of each other. It just could have been a toxic relationship like that, you know?
I mean, it could have been. It also very well could have been that situation where not only is she manipulating the relationship, but she's manipulating people's perceptions of relationships, where she's like, no, I'm not the abusive one, he is.
Yeah. And from what I've read and what I've seen, I think that maybe he reacted to her abuse, but we saw that before, like in the Gabby Petito case, right? Where it's reactive abuse. The reason they're doing it is because they want to get that reaction out of you.
Yeah.
But I honestly don't think he was the main aggressor. Like, I think she was, from what I've seen, but that's just my opinion. When Daniel heard of the pregnancy, Eric and Daniel decided to try to get back together and make things work. Erica moved back in, and they continued to argue. Go ahead.
I would like to give my little PSA here. As the daughter of a single parent, my mom raised me by herself and didn't get remarried until I was in high school. I am the biggest proprietor that kids are not a reason to stay in a relationship. If that relationship's already unhealthy and doesn't work, a child is not going to fix it. It's just an additional stressor. And if you can't be in the same room together, or if you don't love each other anymore, then that's an unhealthy environment for a child.
Yeah.
So instead of making a child live in that environment, give the kid 2 Christmases. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, 2 Christmases are better than preferable. One anyway.
Right? But I've always been, and you know, I've, like, over my life experience, I've had many friends that have had kids and been in, like, unhealthy relationships, and I've always said the same thing to them. Like, my mom raised me on her own, and it was the best decision, and there's nothing lacking in that. A kid is no reason to stay in a relationship.
No, and like I said before, I do a lot of research on domestic violence, and I go and speak at, like, the teenage pregnancy program here and everything. And it actually surprised me, because after what happened to my daughter, I did some research on how domestic violence links to child abuse. And when there's a domestic violence relationship, it is 15 times more likely that there's going to be child abuse in the home. So that's something to really think about.
I think in the past, more so now, because times are changing, obviously, and people aren't as obsessed with this picture perfect, like, quote unquote nuclear family, like the mom, the dad, the kid, the dog, and the white fence. Like, that's not necessarily the dream anymore, so it doesn't happen as often. But I think that's why there's that notion. Also, like, it can dwindle down to religion or whatever the reason. Like, people are shamed if they have a kid and they don't stay together.
Yeah.
When, again, that's more damaging. Like,
yeah.
Love your kids separately so they don't have to see you hate each other.
Dude, that's a quote. So they got back together, and obviously their arguing over many things continued, but they did argue a lot over his motorcycle, which is something that he loved doing, and abusers oftentimes don't like to see their victims happy, right?
Yeah.
So they argued a lot about it, and one day when he was riding with a friend who was part of the club, Daniel was unable to stop at a red light, and when he stopped, finally, he found that his brake lines had been cut.
Oh my gosh.
He would go on to tell his friends that he thought it was Erica, and eventually she even admitted to family and friends that she, and this is a quote, cut some wires, even though she wouldn't admit to cutting the brake lines. When Daniel and Erica's son, Aiden, was born on January 5th, 2013, Daniel's whole world changed. From all accounts, he was a wonderful father. He was all about his son, and he had tons of pictures all over his Facebook of his son. He just loved being a dad. Daniel's brother would tell 48 Hours, "I don't have any doubt that the day his son was born was the happiest day of his life." And in August of that year, the relationship once again had turned sour and was over. Daniel told friends and family that Erica had even threatened him with his own service weapon. So in the episode I saw in some of the reading, it was like she claimed that she had a dream that he was with another woman and he like woke up to her holding a gun to his head kind of thing.
Hey, listen, you can be a little angry at dream significant other, but then you have to realize that it's dream significant other and not threaten the real significant other at all.
Yeah. When Erica moved out, she took Aiden with her and then began the fight over Aiden, the custody battle. In the court records for custody, the couple's text messages were entered into evidence, and it turns out like they had both said some pretty mean things. Like some of the stuff I read, she had threatened to turn him in for abuse or something, and he had said something like, "I'm not afraid of you. I have everything I need to send you to jail." But there was nothing in there that proved he was violent towards her. Eventually, after talking to their friends and family and collecting evidence, they arrested Erica for the murder of Daniel. And 1 month into the trial, Erica would take the stand in her own defense, which doesn't always happen. And she would tell jurors that she had killed Daniel because she was obsessed with the safety of her son. She told jurors that she had snuck into Daniel's house to snoop around that day because she was worried he was abusing him. There she found, this is all what she said. There she found 2 pictures of child pornography, and she said the girls looked about 12 or 13. She told jurors that she didn't tell officers about these photos because she didn't trust them, and they had never given me a reason to trust them. Those are quotes. She told the prosecutors that Daniel had told her that police would stick together and that he would never go to jail. Which, I mean, does happen, you know. Sometimes people abuse their power, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, we know that's true.
But she would say, she said she was worried because, in some of the stuff I read, she was worried because he took showers with their son, who was like a toddler, I think, at this time. And I'm like, well, when my kids were that age, I also took showers with them. I was a single mom and I had girls. Yeah. Obviously not with my son. But there was even times where I was so tired and my kids were sick and they were babies and I would have to get in the shower with them and just hold them, you know? So I don't necessarily believe that that's really a reason. I think she made it up. I think she went there to sneak around.
So was there any sort of investigation like into his computers or anything to see if there was more
Yes, I have
evidence of that?
So Erica's lawyer would tell jurors that 17,000 photos had been deleted from Daniel's phone and that there are hundreds of pornographic pictures on his phone, but they were of adults. So maybe he was into porn, you know.
I mean,
don't yuck on someone's yum, whatever.
Yeah.
But it wasn't child pornography that they found on his phone.
Yeah.
There are also videos and recordings of the couple's arguments. So he recorded her yelling at him.
Well, he knew he needed evidence.
Yep, because he was a cop. So during the trial, security footage was also shown of Erica sneaking into the backyard. It showed Daniel leaving his home at 10:31 and then Erica entering the backyard at 11:07. It then shows him returning to the home at 12:12, which is like an hour. She's been in there snooping around for an hour. And for 42 minutes, no one leaves or enters the house until Erica leaves at 12:54. So Erica would say that she heard Daniel come home and she got scared. And so she hid in Aiden's closet. And, I forgot to mention this part. So when she's snooping around, she just so happens to also pick up his gun.
If you're that afraid of somebody,
you're not going to even go there.
You don't sneak into their house. Like, you wouldn't, period.
Agreed. And you wouldn't hang out for a whole hour waiting. Erica hid in Aiden's closet, and when she heard Daniel go into the bathroom, she walked into the bathroom and killed him. In footage of her on the stand, she cries and tells...
Okay. I'm sorry. That's not you in fear of your life.
It's not.
So when he goes to the bathroom, she approaches him and kills him?
And doesn't
That's
run.
not you being afraid for your life.
Yeah.
He didn't even know you were there.
It's just an excuse. It's just an excuse. Erica cries, tells jurors she regrets it every day, and that this murder has costed her her son and her family. I've seen the footage, and it doesn't look like she's really crying that much.
Yeah, your kid should be taken away. You killed somebody.
His dad.
That's nobody else's fault but your own.
Oh, poor me. Prosecutors would tell the jurors that Erica planned this murder because Daniel was moving on, because 1 week before his murder, he had posted a Facebook picture of his new, younger girlfriend, and they think that's what set her off. Because they had been so much back and forth, right? They'd broken up, gone back together.
That they were officially, he was officially done with her?
Yeah. And like I said, abusers, when they realize they're losing that power over someone, that's the most dangerous time. So it was a week after that. The first trial would end in a mistrial. One of the jurors wouldn't waver. She held out, and it caused arguments between the jurors, apparently. They had 2 jurors on the 48 Hours episode, and they were both, like, super frustrated and were like, no, she's guilty. There was no way to change her mind, and they would say it was obvious she lied on the stand when she attacked Daniel instead of defending herself. So they didn't believe her self-defense or her fear story at all. They could see in the videos that she was vindictive and had manipulated Daniel. And Erica's lawyer would say that a mistrial was a win for them and that Erica had a lot of emotions to work through. And I was like, how is that a win for you? Because then you just have to go through this all over again. And I'm sorry, but I don't care about her emotions. Not even a little bit. Matt and his wife would adopt his twin brother's son, and Erica's rights were severed. And Matt said that he will make sure that Aiden knows how much his dad, Daniel, loved him. Erica is still awaiting her second trial in prison as of this year. So She has not technically been sentenced. I was going to say, any thoughts before I tell you my next insane story?
Yeah, so I will. So the thing that stuck with me throughout this story and that kind of reflects back on the relationship is like the quote at the beginning that like friends and family said that they were immediately infatuated with each other. That's a dangerous word. Infatuation is not love.
Agreed.
That's very different.
And when it happens quickly, it oftentimes, not every time, but it oftentimes isn't love because you don't have long enough to actually get to know that person.
Well, I think being in love immediately can happen. I think being infatuation quickly can happen. But relationships that stick around, having that factor of infatuation, like if that's how somebody, a friend, describes your relationship, take a look at that relationship because that's not love and that's really not healthy either. Mm-hmm. Infatuation is not a goal. Infatuation can become volatile and it's chaotic. It's not a healthy relationship.
And no matter what, it's not gonna last forever.
Yeah.
Well, another thing that sticks out to me is that there were signs, red flags, before they even got married. And he decided to marry her, which I'm not blaming him at all. He probably hoped that it would get better, right? Another thing people think, if we get married, it'll get better. Just like if we have a kid, it'll get better. And that seemed to be, I don't know, it seems like they had a pattern in their relationship, right? Where they would break up and get back together and break up and get back together, and they would do things to try and make things better. But I think that she just really wanted that control in his life. Mm-hmm. And I honestly kind of wonder, I don't know, maybe they had decided to get pregnant together. Maybe they hadn't. Who knows? But another form of domestic violence is getting pregnant when the other person doesn't know or the other person doesn't agree on purpose to control that person. And who knows? Maybe that was her goal. I don't know. Like you said, what was your amazing quote?
Love your kids separately so they don't have to see you hate each other.
Bam.
I said it better the first time.
Yes, you did. But it's still a good quote. And so that's what I take away from that. And when there are red flags, nothing's gonna make it better. In a relationship, even in a healthy relationship, fights are normal, right? Arguments are normal.
Yeah, they happen.
They shouldn't be happening like all the time. And they shouldn't be you taking a knife to the furniture. Okay. Are you ready for the second one?
Let's hear it.
My second one has kind of a happier ending. So at least there's that.
Okay.
My second story also happens to be officer involved. However, the officer in this story is the abuser. Her name is Valerie Cincelli. I don't know how to say her name. It's Cincelli. In 2019, Valerie was arrested for the murder-for-hire scheme against her ex-husband and her new, well, not even ex-husband, estranged husband, and her new boyfriend's teenage daughter.
Wow.
Yeah.
Starting this roller coaster off with a big one.
Most of this stuff came from Dateline and the New York Times, but I watched Dateline about it and I was like, this story is crazy. So I kind of wanted to include it because I also wanted to show not only can men be abused, but anyone can be an abuser. Just because they look good to the outside world and they have this reputation, right, of being great and serving their community. And I mean, she's an officer, so she has to be a good person, right? Yeah. Just because they have that doesn't mean always that they are the person they're pretending to be. Valerie was an officer for the NYPD, and she surprisingly even worked as a domestic violence officer. She was married to her first husband in 2007, and together they had one child, and to the outside world, she appeared to be a good wife and a good mother, as they always do. However, in 2014, her first husband filed for a restraining order. I couldn't find much on that, but soon after that, he filed for divorce and they got divorced and everything. And then Valerie married her second husband, Isaiah, and together Valerie and Isaiah had a son. Isaiah and Valerie met through his stepfather, who also worked at the police station with Valerie. And apparently she had seen his picture on his stepdad's desk, and then she sent him a message on Facebook, which is kind of creepy. Her second marriage was just as toxic as her first one, and allegations of domestic incidents were made by both her first husband, and her second husband. So they both accused her of being abusive in some way. I couldn't find exactly what way, but I think it was verbal and physical. By May of 2019, Valerie had another restraining order against her from Isaiah, and apparently Isaiah was filing for divorce. Valerie, though, had also tried to file for a restraining order against Isaiah. So it's kind of like a he said, she said situation, and in this situation, she's a cop, so they're like probably more prone to believe her, because like you said, in some situations, you know, the women are like, oh, poor me, I'm the victim, when really, in reality, they're the abuser. In February of 2019, Valerie had allegedly discussed a plot with her then-boyfriend, John Duruba, to have Isaiah and her boyfriend's 13-year-old daughter murdered. John eventually tipped off the FBI because he was in fear for his daughter's life. So Valerie and John had met when Valerie was married and she was on duty.
So she was planning, she told her new boyfriend that she was planning to hire someone to kill her ex and new boyfriend's daughter?
Yes.
Why would you tell somebody that you're going to kill their daughter?
She wanted him...
Coercion.
Yes. She wanted him to find her a hitman, and she told him she wanted not only her estranged husband, who she was in the process of divorcing, killed, but also her new boyfriend's 13-year-old daughter, because she was so jealous of his attention towards her. And in this episode, he told a story about how he would buy her stuff, and then she'd be like, well, why aren't you spending that money on me and my kids?
Oh my God.
To which I say, I'm sorry, but what the fuck? Why didn't that guy leave? Like, you know what I mean?
Well, obviously, like, fear, right?
Well, and the whole thing doesn't make sense. They're all not rationally thinking. He, too, was infatuated. Because they met when she was married. He was outside washing his car, and she pulled up to talk to him. She told him she was married, but she wasn't happily married, and the two began sending messages on Instagram. And that's how their affair began. So he, I'd like to add, was in his 50s, and she was in her 30s. So he's like, oh, this younger woman, wants me, and...
I mean, that's the least notable thing of their relationship.
Well, it's not that big a deal, like the age thing, but he was just infatuated with her. He was really attracted to her. It
was a boost to his ego.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to say, was into him. And so she would send him a message and say that Isaiah was a horrible father and he was abusive and all this stuff. And then their relationship also eventually turned volatile, which is when she was jealous of the daughter and she was saying all this stuff, and she called the daughter like a whore and all these crazy things. I think this is the episode, I'm pretty sure this is the episode too, where he had a tattoo of his daughter's name and she made him get it covered up. Yeah.
I withheld from using this word in the previous episode because I don't like to use the term crazy, right? It's a bigger picture than that. But how else do you describe this?
But she's crazy.
But girl, you crazy.
Okay, on May 17th, the FBI orchestrated a sting operation because, you know, John had come forward because, not because he was afraid for Isaiah, right? But because he was afraid for his daughter. Which is fine. Yeah. It's good. At least he was afraid for her.
I mean, it got the plot figured out.
Talk about crazy, okay? You are so right, because she would call or text her dad, and, like, this crazy lady would be even more angry, and then she would bring up killing her again. And she didn't want him talking to his own daughter. And on top of that, she was, like, Facebook stalking her. A 13-year-old. And you would think, like, as a mother, she would understand it's important for them to have a relationship. Obviously, she is not all with it, right? She doesn't have all her marbles.
I don't think she understands. Yeah, I don't think she understands what parental... Like, I'm curious as to what her relationship with her kids looked like.
Me too. It didn't have much information about that, but I'm sure it wasn't great.
Yeah, I'm just curious as to, like, if she had to literally be the center of anybody in her circle, right? Whether it be significant other or child, if she had to be the center of that person's universe.
Yeah.
Right? So my boyfriend can't have anybody else. My husband can't have anybody else. My kids can't have anybody else.
It's kind of sounds like it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So both John and Isaiah participated in the sting. An FBI agent pretending to be a hitman offered proof of her husband's murder, so a picture of him in a car, supposedly murdered, demanded $3,000 in addition to the $7,000 she had already given to John to hire a hitman. And they have this on video.
I don't understand big city life. Is this something that happens regularly? Where it's like, go find me a hitman. Like, what?
And they're like, I know a guy who knows a guy.
I mean, you did say NYPD, so I feel like it's probably more likely than where we are, but...
It's still weird. All the true crime stuff I've seen, people actually really think that they can still be like, find me a hitman and not get turned in. And, like, she's a police officer, so, like, not only is she crazy, but she dumb. Anyway.
I realize that that's probably, like, a stupid thing, but it's so far outside of my scope of life that I'm like, people do that?
After giving them the money, she then discussed her alibi with the fake hitman and her boyfriend and went so far as to destroy 2 phones and told them to delete the text messages between all of them. To which I say, you're a cop. Why the heck are you sending text messages about this?
Do you think, as, like, the FBI agents, the, like, undercover agents, they're probably like, this chick's so stupid.
Probably. They're like, this idiot.
I would be.
What did she learn in the academy?
They'd be like, yeah, let's go over your alibi. Yeah, go ahead, destroy those phones. So great.
Meanwhile, we have all this video evidence and recorded conversations.
You're going to jail.
Because not only that, but her boyfriend had even been wearing a wire and taping their conversations for like months. So they had lots of evidence. I guess, I don't know, in the episode there was some point where she got hurt on duty and she started to take like pain medication, and they say that's where she kind of went a little crazy with her plans. But I think she just was messed up the entire time. When officers went to her house to tell her of the murder, she was like, like cried and said,
oh no,
I'm an officer. And they're like, oh, you are? And like, she even pretended to be upset, and her boyfriend was there, and she's like, oh, he's just a family friend. So her boyfriend had even at one point tried to leave and get a restraining order against her. But when they went to court, he said that it was like they connected again. And he just loved her so much. So he got back with her. And to which I say...
Did he say that this was before the sting operation? So like...
Yes. But he knew she was crazy. Yeah. Also, was this before or after she'd said, I want to have your daughter murdered?
Also, like, regardless of how good your hitman does, the fact that you have a history of domestic violence and, like, your previous husband had a restraining order against you, your husband that was killed had a restraining order against you, like, coming up with the alibi and all that kind of stuff, like, she doesn't think that they'd still look into her and be like, oh, well, I guess it was you have an alibi. I'd be like...
I think she probably got away with it so much, it sounds like, that she just thought she was untouchable.
She was untouchable. That's kind of the doom of it all, isn't it? For all those, like, people out there that come up with these crazy schemes, is because they think they're untouchable, but it's like reality smacks them upside the face, and it's like, just kidding, you're a normal person who did really bad things.
So, armed with all the information, along with the audio and video footage of her conversation, they deemed her a danger to the community. And I'm like, yeah, no joke.
You think?
Especially when you're giving her a badge and a gun. She initially would like defend herself and say, "Oh, I didn't do it." And she was charged with 2 counts of murder for hire, 1 count of obstruction of justice, and she was held without bail.
She went in saying that she didn't do it when did she know the evidence that they had against her? Because that's really stupid.
Yeah. She tried to say that it was her boyfriend's idea, but like they had all this taped evidence that showed the lie detector determined that was a lie. Ultimately, in April of 2021, Valerie pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice, and then the murder charges were dismissed. And she was handed a 4-year sentence in November. And she said, "I'm apologizing from the bottom of my heart. I can't believe I allowed myself to get to that place, that dark place." Listen to this. So, she obviously lost her job. She's no longer a police officer.
I hope so.
And she was incarcerated at the Federal Medical Center at Lexington in Kentucky, where she's expected to remain until October 12th of 2022. She will be released in a week. Unless she's already been released. I couldn't find much online about that. Yeah. Anyway, maybe you know what it is, too. It's like, so I know from my case, from the criminal case for my daughter, they had to take into account that he didn't have a criminal background and that he had done this and he had done that. Which to me, I'm like, okay, like we've said many times before, just because you did good things doesn't mean you're not a shitty person.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that the bad things you've done now need to be less, like, looked at with a less crucial eye because it's the first time you did a bad thing.
Yes.
Like,
and she was a domestic violence officer. She knew what domestic violence was. Do you know what I mean? So, anyway, her ex-husband, Isaiah, would say that he didn't think that she was capable of this, but when he actually heard it, he was like, "Oh, she can do anything." He said, "When I found out about the plea deal, I was furious." This is a quote. "I thought she was being given a free pass. I truly believe she will find someone to finish the job when she gets out." He asked the judge to give the maximum sentence, arguing that his ex-wife is a narcissistic sociopath and a master manipulator, which is probably true. He said when they were first married, she was fun-loving and she devoted her life to protecting people. And even in one interview I watched, he was like, "Oh, she's a police officer, so she has to be a good person." Like I said at the beginning, right? No. As the relationship went on, he said he saw another side of her, and that was her true self. And this is a quote: "Someone who is cruel, selfish. She became verbally abusive and physically abusive, and the only thing that mattered to her were material objects and material wants," he said.
Yeah.
I'm sure she put on this, you know, she's this pretty girl officer who's like a badass, and she's like helping domestic violence victims. So of course everyone's like, "Oh, she's such a great person." When in reality, like you said, she was just some crazy wacko who wanted all the attention. So maybe don't date a dad. Don't date a single dad. Date somebody who doesn't have children, who is a loser and mean and only cares about you. Or just don't date at all. I don't know. It's all about control. But I'm also like, if you didn't want them to pay attention to other people, then why did you choose someone who was a good dad? Do you know what I mean? So her boyfriend, John, had always maintained his innocence. And on Dateline, he said he wants the world to know that he's a good father. And he says, this is a quote, "I'm lovable, funny. I'm not what they portrayed. You know, you got to move forward and keep going forward and just try to survive." It was Valerie's own words that put her in jail. It's her own voice that she wanted to do. She could have stopped this at any time. He was never charged with anything. And I think it's because he testified against her. He came forward to the FBI.
Yeah,
he also had a conversation with her ex-husband to tell him about it. This whole story is crazy, but it has a happier ending, right? Because this guy finally woke up one day and was like, "Oh, her wanting to kill my 13-year-old daughter and her ex-husband probably isn't a great sign." Like, can you imagine?
Not normal.
Even if he had gone on and like done what she had wanted, and let's say they didn't get caught, right? I mean, chances are, one, it's her ex-husband, so they're going to be like, that's suspicious. But two, like her new boyfriend's daughter, which I just can't wrap my head around that. But if her new boyfriend's daughter had been murdered too at the same time, it'd be like, this is weird. I really, 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 really hope that she got some mental help while she was in there. I don't think it'll do anything for her, but
right.
I mean, here's hoping. Anyway, I just thought it would be a good, obviously October, like I said, is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and I thought it would be a good idea to bring forward that men are just as likely to become domestic violence victims. If you or someone you know thinks they're in a domestic violence situation, please visit the Domestic Violence Support page or call 1-800-799-SAFE.
That's 1-800-799-7233. You can also text the word START to 88788.
Thank you for listening. Additional information for each case can be found on our website, truthliesandalibis.buzzsprout.com. New episodes will be uploaded every Monday. Find us on Facebook and Instagram at Truth Lies and Alibis.